My name is Emily Bennett, and I'm 32 years old. I work as a software engineer in Portland, Oregon, which isn't exactly the most glamorous job, but it pays the bills. I make around $76,000 a year, which is enough to keep us comfortable, especially with my husband Noah's income as well. Our life, for the most part, was what I'd always hoped for: stable, predictable, and full of love. Noah and I have been married for 7 years now, and we have 2 kids. Our son, Luke, just turned 5, and our daughter Zoe is 2. I still can't believe how much they've grown. I never thought I'd be the kind of mom who was constantly amazed by their milestones, but here I am, smiling at the smallest things, like Luke finally being able to ride his bike without training wheels, or Zoe saying her first full sentence. These moments are small, but they're everything. Noah and I met back in 2014 at a mutual friend's graduation party. I was still in college, just beginning to find my own footing in the world, and Noah was this charismatic, outgoing guy who seemed to make everyone feel like they were his best friend. He worked as a financial advisor at a firm downtown, and I remember thinking how well put together he was. The nice car, the tailored suit, the kind of guy who had this effortless confidence about him. He had a way of making everyone feel special, and he definitely made me feel like I was the only one in the room. We hit it off right away, and after a few months of dating, I was pretty sure Noah was the one. In 2017, we got married. We bought a house in a nice suburban neighborhood for $320,000, which was a huge milestone for both of us. It felt like we were on the right track, like we were doing everything we were supposed to do: building a life together, growing our family, and making memories. But while our marriage seemed to be going well, there was always something that made me uneasy. It was Noah's mother, Sandra. She was 58, lived in a modest ranch-style house just a few miles away, and was a constant presence in our lives. On the surface, Sandra was pleasant enough, but something about her always rubbed me the wrong way. I tried my best to get along with her. I showed up to every holiday, called her on her birthday, sent her flowers when I could, and tried to be the supportive daughter-in-law that she might want. But no matter how much effort I put in, it always felt like I was walking on eggshells around her. It wasn't that Sandra was overtly cruel or mean. It was the little comments that left me feeling like I could never quite measure up. For example, she'd compliment my cooking, but then tell me, well, Noah's favorite is still my lasagna. Or, you could try dressing a bit more like you care about it. It wasn't even the fact that she was critical. It was that she was so casual about it, like she didn't realize how her words made me feel. It always felt like she was comparing me to herself, and I wasn't coming out on top. Over time, I started to feel like I was trying too hard to please someone who didn't really want to be pleased. And yet, despite these little things, I kept trying. I thought maybe if I could just do enough, show her that I was worthy of being a part of her family, things would get better. But they never really did. I remember one time, early in our marriage, when she told me that she didn't like the way I dressed, and she made a point to mention it to Noah in front of me. Emily could really do with some more stylish clothes, she said, almost as if I wasn't in the room. Noah gave me an apologetic look and told me not to worry about it, but I couldn't help it. I was so frustrated. I was the one who worked full-time, raised our son, cooked dinner, and did all the things that kept our household running, but it felt like nothing I did was ever good enough for her. Still, I didn't give up. I kept trying to be the daughter-in-law who was always thoughtful, always giving, always showing up. Then about 10 months ago, things started to change. Noah came home one evening, looking concerned, and told me that his mom wasn't feeling well. She'd been getting more fatigued and had started having trouble with her joints. At first, it seemed like just a normal illness. She was tired, run down, but nothing that couldn't be managed, or so we thought. Noah started visiting her more frequently, sometimes taking Luke with him because he thought it would cheer her up. I was fine with that at first. I didn't think it was anything out of the ordinary. But then, Noah began going over there more and more. At first, it was just once or twice a week, but soon it became 3 or 4 times a week, and sometimes he would stay overnight. Every time, He told me that Sandra was too ill to be alone and that he just wanted to make sure she was okay. It seemed noble enough at first, and I didn't think anything of it. But the more he went over there, the more I felt like he was slipping away from me. I asked him a few times if everything was really okay, if Sandra's illness was more serious than he was letting on, but Noah brushed it off every time. He said I didn't understand how much she needed him, how much support she required. I wasn't sure what to think. Maybe I was being paranoid. But it was hard to ignore the feeling that something was off. I started asking more questions, and that's when I learned about the medical expenses. Noah explained that Sandra's treatment was becoming more costly, with specialists that didn't accept insurance and copays that were adding up. He told me he was doing everything he could to help her, and when I asked if there was anything more we could do, he suggested that I send some money her way. So I did. It started small, a few $100s here and there, but it quickly added up. Over the course of 8 months, I had sent her around $8,000, and Noah assured me that all of it was going toward her treatment. At the time I trusted him, I believed him. As the months went by, I started noticing little things that made me question whether I was just overthinking everything, or if something more was really going on. Noah, who had always been easygoing and relaxed, became more critical. It wasn't about anything big, just small things here and there, things that didn't seem worth making a fuss over, but somehow it all added up. One day, he commented on how I loaded the dishwasher. Then he told me that I was folding the kids' clothes wrong. Another time, he pointed out that the living room felt cluttered, even though I'd just cleaned it that morning. These weren't big issues, but they felt like he was starting to scrutinize every little thing I did. It was as though he was finding faults in everything around him, and for some reason, I felt like I was at the center of it all. At the same time, he started pulling away. It wasn't a dramatic shift, not at first, but the emotional distance was undeniable. He seemed more distant, preoccupied, as if he was always somewhere else, mentally at least. We weren't fighting, but we weren't connecting like we used to. It was the little things. He'd come home from work, sit on the couch, and scroll through his phone without so much as a "Hey, how was your day?" He'd eat dinner in silence, barely responding to anything I said. I tried not to let it bother me at first, telling myself he was just stressed from work or that he was dealing with his mom's illness. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. He was changing, and I didn't know why. It was around this time that I started noticing the apartment listings. One evening, after dinner, Noah left his laptop open on the kitchen counter while he took a call from his mom. I don't even know why I did it, but I was curious. I opened his laptop and saw a tab with an apartment listing. It was for a 2-bedroom place on the east side of Portland, just a few miles from downtown. I froze. My heart skipped a beat. I stared at the page for what felt like an eternity, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe he was just looking for a friend, or maybe it was a mistake. But it wasn't a mistake. My instincts told me something was off, and I knew right then that I couldn't just ignore it. I closed the tab quickly, but the knot in my stomach wouldn't go away. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the more I thought about it, the more it gnawed at me. The apartment listing didn't make sense. Why would Noah be looking at apartments? We had a house, and although things had been tense lately, I couldn't imagine him wanting to leave. But after seeing that listing, I started paying closer attention to everything Noah was doing. His late nights at Sandra's became more frequent, sometimes lasting until 10 or 11 p.m., and on a few occasions, he stayed overnight. He'd always say Sandra needed him, that she wasn't feeling well, but I knew that wasn't the whole story. It wasn't just the time he spent at his mom's house that was bothering me. It was the way he acted when he was home. He seemed irritated, impatient, almost resentful. I'd ask him about his day, and he'd brush me off. If I asked about Sandra, he'd get defensive, telling me I didn't understand how difficult it was for her. I tried to be understanding, but the more I tried to reach him, the further away he seemed to get. It was like I was walking on eggshells, trying not to set him off, while at the same time feeling this growing sense of unease. Then came the receipts. One weekend, I had to go into Noah's office to grab some papers for work, and while I was there, I stumbled upon a receipt in his desk. It was for a dinner at a restaurant I didn't recognize, a high-end place downtown. The total was $180. That struck me as odd. We hadn't been out to dinner at a fancy restaurant in years. In fact, since we had kids, we mostly ordered takeout or ate in. The receipt didn't sit right with me, so I decided to look at our bank statements. What I found made my stomach drop. Over the past 10 months, more than $10,000 had left our account. The majority of it was marked for medical expenses for Sandra, but there were other transfers, random cash withdrawals, Venmo payments to people I didn't know. I wasn't sure what was going on, but the more I looked, the more suspicious it all became. I confronted Noah about it. I tried to stay calm, but I could feel my pulse racing. I told him the charges didn't make sense, that I needed to know where the money was going. He got defensive right away, like I was accusing him of something. He told me I didn't understand how expensive Sandra's medical care was, that I had no idea what it took to care for someone so sick. Then he said something that still echoes in my mind. "You don't get it, Emily. My mother could be dying, and you're focused on a bank statement?" His tone was sharp, accusatory, and it shut me down completely. I felt guilty for even asking, as if I was the one in the wrong. But at that moment, I knew I was right to be suspicious. Something was happening that I couldn't explain, and Noah wasn't being honest with me. I didn't know what to do with all the doubts swirling in my head. I felt like I was living with a stranger, a man I didn't recognize. The man who had once been warm, loving, and present seemed to have disappeared, replaced by someone distant, defensive, and cold. As much as I wanted to believe him, every instinct I had told me something was wrong. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine, but I also didn't know how to confront him without pushing him further away. So, I did what I always do when I'm unsure of what to do. I kept quiet, and I watched. And the more I watched, the more I realized that the truth was starting to unravel before me. I just didn't know how far it would go, or how much I would have to lose before I finally saw it for what it was. The days after my confrontation with Noah were filled with a strange, heavy silence. I spent the next few weeks trying to put the pieces together, unsure of what to believe. Noah was still going to Sandra's more often, staying late, and the tension between us only grew. I'd come home from work, find him gone again, and feel this crushing weight in my chest, like I was losing him bit by bit. The love we once had felt distant, like a memory I could barely hold on to. But the more I tried to keep things normal, the more impossible it became. I started doing things I'd never done before. I went through his things, his phone, his laptop, his jacket pockets, anything that might give me a clue about what was really going on. I told myself I wasn't being paranoid, that I was just being careful. But deep down, I knew I was crossing a line. I had this overwhelming feeling that I was on the edge of something much bigger than I could understand. I wanted to know the truth, but I wasn't sure I was ready for what I might find. One evening, when Noah was once again at his mom's, I found myself staring at his phone on the kitchen counter. He'd left it there while he went to make a call, and something inside me snapped. I wasn't proud of what I was about to do, but I picked it up. I told myself I was just going to check the weather app or something harmless. But as my fingers swiped through his messages, I stopped when I saw something that made my heart skip a beat. A conversation with a woman named Emma. The messages were casual at first, nothing that seemed out of place. But then I saw something that made my blood run cold. Noah had been texting her about dinner plans, about meeting up at a restaurant downtown. My stomach sank as I read through the messages. They weren't just friendly exchanges. There was flirtation, there was familiarity, there was an intimacy that made me feel like I was looking at something I wasn't supposed to see. My mind raced as I scrolled further, trying to make sense of it all. Emma wasn't just a colleague or a friend. She was the woman from the birthday party. The woman I had seen sitting with Noah, laughing and holding my son, Luke, in her lap. The woman who had taken my place without me even knowing. My heart thudded painfully in my chest. Noah had been seeing her behind my back, and I had no idea. I wanted to confront him then and there, to throw the phone at him and demand answers, but something stopped me. I needed more. I needed proof. I couldn't just accuse him without knowing the full truth, and I needed to gather everything I could before I did anything rash. I set the phone down, my hands shaking, and tried to calm myself. The feeling of betrayal, of complete shock, was overwhelming, but I knew I couldn't act on impulse. I needed a plan. The next day, I went through our bank statements again, this time with a more critical eye. The first time I looked, I hadn't seen the bigger picture. But now, the numbers jumped out at me. I realized that over the past several months, Noah had been moving money around. Large sums, but in small increments, scattered across different accounts and Venmo transfers. I could see the pattern now, the slow siphoning of money that I had once thought was going toward Sandra's treatment. But as I kept looking, it became clear that this wasn't about medical bills at all. Some of the money had been going to Sandra's mortgage, and some of it had been sent to a secret bank account that I didn't know about. I felt sick to my stomach. For months, I had been sending money, thinking it was to help with Sandra's supposed illness, while Noah had been secretly using our funds for something else entirely. I felt like a fool. I had trusted him, and he had been lying to me the entire time. That evening, after Noah left again, I did something I had been dreading. I drove to Sandra's house. I wasn't sure what I was hoping to find, but I knew I couldn't keep waiting for answers. I stopped at the store, bought ingredients for homemade chicken soup, and grabbed a bouquet of flowers. I tried to reassure myself that I was just being a good daughter-in-law, that I was trying to show support, but deep down, I knew I was showing up for the wrong reasons. I wasn't there to care for Sandra. I was there to confront the truth, to see what was really going on behind closed doors. As I pulled up to Sandra's house, I saw multiple cars in the driveway. Noah's car, Sandra's car, and a few others I didn't recognize. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe some family had come over to visit. But when I walked to the door and looked inside, I saw Noah sitting at the table with Emma, the woman from the birthday party. My son Luke was sitting on her lap, laughing and eating cake. The sight of it took my breath away. I stood there in the doorway, unable to move, feeling completely numb. I tried to make sense of it, but it all felt like a nightmare. I had been brought into their world without my consent, and now I was seeing firsthand the life Noah had been building behind my back. It wasn't just the affair that stung. It was the fact that he had kept it hidden from me, all while making me feel guilty for asking questions. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, holding the soup and the flowers in my hands, before I made my decision. I couldn't stay. I turned and walked out of the house, my mind racing. As I headed for the door, I caught sight of a stack of papers on a table near the entrance. Something about them caught my eye. As I reached out to grab them, my heart stopped. It was a legal petition. A petition for full custody of Luke and Zoe, filed by Noah. The weight of it hit me all at once. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I took a few photos of the documents, my hands trembling, before slipping out the door and into my car. I drove home in a daze, the world spinning around me, and the reality of what I had just discovered slowly sinking in. I had been right all along. Noah had been planning to take my kids, to leave me with nothing. And now I had the proof. When I got home that night, the shock still hadn't worn off. I sat in the car for a few minutes, staring at the steering wheel, trying to make sense of everything I had just seen. My hands were shaking, and I couldn't stop replaying the images in my mind. Noah at the table with Emma, my son laughing in her lap, like a family, while I was out here in the cold, completely shut out. The legal documents in my purse felt like a weight I couldn't shake. A petition for full custody of my children. My stomach twisted into knots as I thought about how Noah had been planning this. A plan to take everything from me, all while pretending that he was the devoted husband and father. How had I missed this? How had I not seen it sooner? I didn't know what to do next. The betrayal stung so deeply that it was hard to think clearly. But one thing was certain. I couldn't just let this go. I needed to fight. I needed to protect my kids, even if Noah had been working behind my back to take them. I couldn't let him get away with it. But I also knew I couldn't do this alone. I had to talk to someone who could help me navigate this mess, someone who understood the legal side of things, who could give me the clarity I needed to move forward. The next day, I called my best friend Rachel. I knew I couldn't go through this without her. I explained everything: the affair, the custody petition, the money being funneled into secret accounts. Rachel was quiet for a moment, as if processing the weight of everything I was telling her. Then she said something that changed everything. "Emily," she said, her voice steady but full of concern, "I think you need to get a lawyer. A good one. Someone who can help you figure out what to do next." Rachel had been through her own tough divorce a few years ago, and I knew she wasn't saying this lightly. She knew how much was at stake. I didn't argue with her. She was right. I needed someone who could help me fight for my kids, someone who could guide me through this. So, I started researching family lawyers in Portland. I didn't want just anyone. I needed someone who would be tough, someone who would take this case seriously and wouldn't back down. After some searching, I found the right lawyer, Diane Hollister. I made an appointment for the following week, hoping that by then, I would have gathered all the evidence I needed. In the meantime, I sat down and started going through everything I had: the bank statements, the Venmo transfers, the photos of the legal documents I'd found at Sandra's house. I realized how much I had already uncovered, but it didn't feel like enough. I needed more. I went through the past few months of our bank statements again, meticulously documenting every questionable withdrawal, every transfer that didn't add up. It was clear now that Noah had been siphoning off our joint funds to support Sandra's mortgage, and probably his own secret life with Emma. He'd been using me, using our family's money to pay for a future I wasn't even part of. The more I uncovered, the angrier I became. How could he do this to me? How could he betray me in such a calculated way? The next few days were a blur. I went through our shared accounts again, took screenshots of every piece of evidence I had, and compiled everything into a folder. I couldn't afford to miss anything. Each piece of information felt like a small victory, a step closer to the truth. But still, I couldn't shake the feeling of helplessness. How had I allowed myself to be so blind to what was happening right in front of me? How had I let this man manipulate me, lie to me, and make me feel like I was the one at fault? I had trusted him, and he had used that trust to destroy everything I had worked so hard to build. Finally, the day of my consultation with Diane arrived. I drove to her office, my heart racing in my chest. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I was hoping for something, anything, that would help me regain control of my life. When I walked into Diane's office, I was struck by how professional she seemed. She was in her mid-50s, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a neat bun, and she had a calm, no-nonsense demeanor that put me at ease. Diane shook my hand and gestured for me to sit down. She looked at me expectantly. "Tell me everything," she said. "Don't leave out the details. I need to know everything, even the parts you think aren't important." So I did. I told her about the affair, the money, the custody petition, the documents I had photographed, and the conversation with Rachel. I told her how Noah had been spending more and more time at Sandra's, how he'd been getting defensive when I asked questions, and how, in the back of my mind, I had started to suspect something wasn't right. Diane listened carefully, never interrupting, taking notes as I spoke. When I finished, she paused for a moment, then picked up the photo of the custody petition that I had taken at Sandra's house. She studied it for a few seconds before looking at me with a calm but serious expression. "Your husband made a critical mistake," she said. "He put his plans in writing before he was ready to file." That's when Diane explained what I hadn't fully understood. Noah and Sandra hadn't just been lying about her health. They'd been building a case, creating a narrative that painted me as an absent, uninvolved mother. Every time Noah told me not to come to Sandra's house, every time I sent money instead of showing up in person, those became evidence against me. It was all part of a carefully constructed story. Diane told me that if we moved forward, we'd have the upper hand. The evidence I had was strong, and Noah had made a huge mistake by preparing everything before filing. "We can use this," she said confidently. "You have a case, Emily, and we're going to make sure you get everything you deserve." Hearing those words gave me a sense of hope I hadn't felt in weeks. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I had a real chance of fighting back. I wasn't going to let Noah take my kids. I wasn't going to let him walk away with everything he'd stolen. I had a plan now. I had the strength to fight for my family. The days following my meeting with Diane felt like a whirlwind. Everything seemed to be moving at once. And yet, it felt like I was trapped in this limbo where I couldn't fully breathe. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was finally in control, like I was going to take back my life and protect my children. But with that feeling of control came a weight of responsibility I wasn't ready for. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about my kids, my family, my future. And I couldn't afford to mess it up. I spent the next few days gathering every shred of evidence I had. I went through bank statements again, this time with Diane's advice in mind, organizing the transfers and withdrawals that didn't make sense. I even contacted the bank to get detailed records for the past year. I needed everything to be clear, every detail laid out for the court. Each document I collected, each receipt, each screenshot of texts and photos felt like another step closer to putting an end to Noah's plan. It was hard, not just emotionally, but physically too. I was exhausted from the sleepless nights, from trying to balance my work with my personal life while all of this was going on. There were days when I felt like I could barely keep it together. I still had to be a mom to Luke and Zoe. I still had to go to work. I still had to pretend like I wasn't falling apart at the seams. But I knew I had to keep going. For them. I had to be strong. If I wasn't, who would be? Then there were the nights when Noah wasn't home, when it was just me and the kids. I'd lie awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to process everything. I couldn't stop thinking about what Noah had done. I couldn't stop thinking about how he'd betrayed me. The man I had trusted with everything had been planning to destroy our family, to take our children away from me, all while I was out here doing everything I could to keep things together. It made me sick to think about. But the more I thought about it, the angrier I became. Anger became fuel. I wasn't going to let him take anything from me. Not now. Not ever. It wasn't just Noah who had to be dealt with, though. I had to confront Sandra, too. The woman who had stood by and watched her son manipulate me. I knew she'd played a part in all of this, and I had no idea what kind of relationship I was going to have with her after everything came out. I'd always tried to get along with her, but now I wasn't sure there was any point in pretending. But confronting Sandra would have to wait. My focus was on getting my kids and myself out of the mess Noah had created. The next week, I met with Diane again to go over everything I had gathered. She went over the bank statements with me and confirmed what I already knew. Noah had been diverting money for months, funneling it into his secret account and using it to pay for Sandra's mortgage. The small, irregular transfers, the large cash withdrawals, the payments for medical expenses that didn't exist, all of it was damning. But what really sealed the deal was the fact that Noah had been using our shared funds for something other than what he'd claimed. He hadn't just lied to me. He'd stolen from me. And that, Diane said, would work in my favor. Diane then went over the next steps. She explained how we were going to file the necessary paperwork, how we would start the process of mediation. She told me that Noah would probably fight back, but that we were in a strong position. The evidence was overwhelming, and Noah had no idea how much I knew. I wasn't going to let him walk away from this without facing the consequences of his actions. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about my kids, and they deserved the truth. The mediation date was set for 2 weeks later. I knew it was going to be difficult, but I also knew it was necessary. I had to face Noah, and I had to do it with strength and resolve. I couldn't show weakness, not even for a second. He'd been manipulating me for so long, and I wasn't going to let him do it anymore. I wasn't the same person I had been when all of this started. The Emily who had trusted Noah completely was gone. I was stronger now. I was ready. In the days leading up to the mediation, I kept a steady routine. I took care of the kids. I went to work. I worked late into the night preparing for the meeting, organizing my thoughts, and reviewing the evidence. I couldn't afford to let my guard down. Noah was unpredictable, and I had no idea how he was going to respond when the truth came out. The night before the mediation, Noah came home late, as usual. He didn't even seem to notice the tension in the air. I'd spent the evening with the kids, putting them to bed and making sure they were settled. Noah came in, kissed me on the cheek, and said something about how he'd be at Sandra's tomorrow night. I didn't respond. I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of knowing what I was planning. After he went to bed, I sat in the living room for a while, staring at the folder of evidence on the coffee table. This was it. Tomorrow, everything would come to light. I didn't know what would happen after that, but I knew I was ready. I wasn't going to let him take my kids. I wasn't going to let him get away with all the lies. This was my fight now, and I wasn't backing down. I stayed up late that night, thinking about everything I had to lose. But I also thought about everything I had already gained. My strength, my clarity, and my resolve to protect my children. The next day, I would walk into that mediation room and fight for them. And no matter what, I would make sure Noah couldn't destroy everything we had built. He was going to have to face the consequences. I wasn't going to let him win. The morning of the mediation arrived, and my stomach was a tight knot of nerves. I woke up earlier than usual, just before the kids, and spent a few moments sitting on the edge of the bed, taking deep breaths. Today would be the day I finally faced the reality of what had been happening behind my back. Today, I would confront Noah. I had all the evidence I needed, but the thought of sitting across from him, looking him in the eye after everything he had done, made my heart race. I wasn't sure how I was going to keep it together, but I knew I had to. There was no turning back now. I spent the morning getting the kids ready for daycare. Luke was excited about a new drawing he had made at school, and Zoe, as usual, was glued to her stuffed bear, walking around in her little princess dress. I smiled at them, trying to push the anxiety to the back of my mind, but it lingered. I couldn't stop thinking about the way Noah had been living this double life. The late nights, the secret bank accounts, the affair. I couldn't stop thinking about how he had thought he could just walk away with everything, that he could take my children from me without any consequences. I felt a fire inside me, something fierce and protective. I had to do this for them. Noah had already left for work by the time I finished getting the kids settled. I didn't know if he had any idea about what was coming, but I could guess. I'd seen the way he tried to act normal the night before, like everything was fine, but there was an underlying tension in the air. He knew something was off, even if he didn't know exactly what. It felt like we were both walking around with this heavy secret, and today it would all come crashing down. I made my way to Diane's office just after lunch. The drive felt long, the silence in the car almost suffocating, but I kept my focus on what I had to do. I had to stay calm. I had to stay composed. When I arrived, Diane was already there, waiting. She greeted me with a firm handshake, her usual calm demeanor comforting me more than I expected. Her confidence was a steady anchor. I felt like I was holding on to her strength in that moment. We sat down together, and Diane ran through the plan once more. She reassured me that I had the upper hand, that the evidence I had gathered was more than enough to put Noah in a corner. I tried to listen, to take in her words, but my mind kept drifting back to the moment I would have to face him. I knew it wouldn't be easy. I knew he was going to fight, to try to twist the story in his favor, to make it seem like I was the one who had wronged him. But I couldn't let that happen. I had to hold firm. As we walked into the mediation room, my breath caught in my throat. The moment I had been dreading was finally here. Noah was already sitting at the table, his eyes focused downward, his body tense. His lawyer, a woman with sharp features and a no-nonsense attitude, sat next to him. She glanced at me as I entered, but I didn't let her intimidation get to me. This wasn't about them anymore. This was about my children, my life. Noah didn't look up at first. When he finally did, his eyes were dark, almost angry, like he was trying to figure out what I knew. The silence between us felt heavy, suffocating. I could hear the pounding of my own heartbeat in my ears, but I refused to break eye contact. Diane took her seat across from us, and the process began. The mediator, a middle-aged man with a calm, measured voice, began by outlining the purpose of the session, asking if we were there to reach a settlement or if we were expecting a trial. Diane spoke first, laying out the facts clearly, methodically, like a prosecutor making their case. She didn't need to say much, though. The evidence was all there. Every single detail of Noah's deceit was laid bare. The bank statements, the Venmo transfers, the money siphoned off into secret accounts, the photos I'd taken of the custody petition, the affair, everything. Diane spoke about the documents with the precision of a surgeon. Noah shifted uncomfortably in his chair as she presented everything in a way that left him with no room to argue. His lawyer barely spoke, clearly realizing the strength of the case against her client. I stayed quiet during most of the initial discussion. I didn't need to speak yet. My silence was powerful. Every time I looked at Noah, I saw the cracks in the man I once knew. He had no excuses left. Every lie he'd told, every time he'd pushed me aside, was being exposed. I could see it in his face, the realization that the game was up. He tried to protest, tried to make it seem like he was the one who had been wronged, but his voice wavered. His arguments didn't hold water. I could see that Diane had already anticipated his every move. She was ahead of him, and for the first time in a long time, I felt in control. When it was finally my turn to speak, I didn't hesitate. I looked straight at Noah, and I told him everything I had been holding in for months. I told him how he had betrayed me, how he had manipulated me into thinking everything was fine while he worked behind my back to take my children away from me. I told him how it felt to watch him slip further away, to be gaslighted into thinking I was the problem. I told him that I wasn't going to let him take my kids, that I would fight for them with everything I had. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I was calm, composed, but firm. I had nothing to prove anymore. The truth was on my side. Noah's lawyer tried to spin things, but it was clear there was no room left for negotiation. Diane pushed for a settlement, offering full primary custody to me, supervised visitation for Noah, and the repayment of the money he had taken. It was a strong offer, and Noah had no choice but to accept. I watched him sign the papers, his face pale, his hands shaking slightly. The man who thought he could manipulate me, who thought he could take everything without consequence, had lost. And for the first time in months, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. As we left the mediation room, I felt like I was walking on air. The battle wasn't over, but the worst was behind me. Noah would have to live with the consequences of his actions, and I would rebuild my life with my kids. I had won, and nothing would ever take that away from me. Life's too short to settle for lies and manipulation. Always trust your instincts and stand up for what you deserve. Sometimes the best revenge is living your truth, stronger than ever. And hey, if you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe to the Revenge Protocol YouTube channel for more juicy tales, and don't forget to drop a comment. Let's all stay wise, fierce, and unapologetically us.